90,000 feet above the Earth, Captain Pete Collins is flying faster than a rifle bullet, alone at the extreme edge of our atmosphere, with no simulator training to prepare him for what comes next. The official records certify lower flights, but Collins' story defies the evidence. Why did America risk everything, sending pilots beyond the limits into uncharted air with no room for error? The answer begins with a single flight and an institutional gamble that changed aviation history forever. Stories of the Blackbird climbing beyond 90,000 feet with no simulator time rest on a thin line between legend and documented fact. The most detailed account traces back to Pete Collins, a test pilot whose family recalls a 1965 flight ordered by Kelly Johnson himself that pushed the SR-71 above its published ceiling. According to those who knew him, Collins had no simulator training for this mission. The simulator, they say, simply was not ready. There was no checklist for what he was about to attempt, but these details come not from official flight logs or declassified Air Force reports, but from family testimony and later retellings in aviation circles. When it comes to official record, the picture is far more precise. The SR-71 certified altitude record stands at 85,069 feet, set in July 1976 by pilot Al Joers and reconnaissance systems officer George Morgan, flying aircraft 617962. That record is backed by instrumented data, ground tracking, and a chain of documentation that leaves no room for doubt. Museums and technical histories consistently cite SR-71 operational altitudes around 80,000 to 85,000 feet, with occasional references to test climbs higher, but without naming pilots, dates, or tail numbers. No declassified mission log or flight card has surfaced to confirm Collins' ascent or the claim of exceeding 90,000 feet. That gap between family recollection and archival silence is not unusual in the world of Cold War test flying. Early Blackbird sorties often went unpublicized, buried under layers of secrecy. It is clear that the SR-71 was physically capable of brief excursions above its official ceiling, and that early test pilots sometimes flew profiles that later became the stuff of legend. But until new evidence emerges, flight data, mission cards, or pilot debriefs, Collins' ascent remains an unverified chapter in the Blackbird history, echoing the tension between what can be proven and what is remembered. In 1965, as the SR-71 program accelerated through its earliest test flights, one critical piece of the training pipeline lagged far behind the jet's own capabilities: the simulator. The Blackbird's flight simulator, a complex machine intended to mimic the aircraft's systems and behavior at the edge of the atmosphere, simply was not operational when the first cadre of pilots began flying. Lockheed's Skunk Works engineers, working under intense secrecy and relentless deadlines, faced technical hurdles in replicating the aircraft's unique controls and high-altitude dynamics. The simulator's analog computers and custom-built visuals trailed the pace of actual flight testing. Instead of cockpit simulation, early SR-71 pilots like Pete Collins relied on classroom briefings, systems benches, and ground trainers. They studied schematics, memorized emergency procedures, and rehearsed step-by-step sequences on static mock-ups. But none of these could reproduce the physical sensations or the rapid-fire decision-making required at Mach 3 and altitudes above 80,000 feet. The training pipeline filled the gap with step flights in T-38 and KC-135 aircraft, gradually introducing pilots to higher speeds and thinner air. The final leap into the Blackbird's true operating regime happened in the jet itself. Official records from 1965 confirm the simulator was not ready for full mission profiles. Pilots entered the cockpit with only partial preparation, trusting their prior experience and the support of the ground crew. This institutional gap was not a matter of negligence, but a direct result of Cold War urgency and the technical limits of the era. The Blackbird's first missions pushed beyond what even its engineers could fully anticipate, and the pilots were left to bridge the unknown in real time without the safety net of a simulator run. The SR-71's ability to reach the edge of space depended on a set of systems that worked at the very limits of known engineering. At the center were two Pratt & Whitney J58 engines, each capable of producing more than 32,000 pounds of thrust. Below Mach 2, these engines functioned like conventional turbojets. But as the Blackbird accelerated past Mach 2, a transformation took place. Variable geometry inlet spikes slid backward, precisely managing shockwaves to slow supersonic air before it reached the compressor. At Mach 3, over half of the thrust came not from the engine core, but from the inlet itself, which acted as a ram jet, compressing air so efficiently that the engines relied on it to maintain power. Any disruption in this delicate balance, called an unstart, could send a shockwave forward, causing a sudden loss of thrust and violent yaw. The analog computers managing the spikes and bypass doors had to react instantly. A single miscalculation at 85,000 feet could turn a routine climb into a crisis. Above 80,000 feet, the air was so thin that even small errors in spike position or bypass scheduling could trigger an unstart. Restarting an engine at these altitudes was nearly impossible, so pilots were trained to descend below 80,000 feet before attempting recovery. The SR-71's titanium skin was another crucial innovation. At Mach 3, friction heated the airframe to over 600 degrees Fahrenheit, causing the fuselage to expand by as much as 2 inches during flight. On the ground, fuel tanks leaked JP-7, a fuel so stable it could be used as a hydraulic fluid and coolant, because the gaps in the structure only sealed at speed and temperature. JP-7's high flash point prevented vapor lock and coking, allowing the engines to run at maximum output without risk of fire. Every system, from inlet spikes to fuel chemistry, was designed for an environment where the margin for error was almost non-existent. At altitudes where the sky fades to black and the horizon curves away, the SR-71 systems met their limits, and so did its pilots. Pete Collins, sealed inside a pressure suit, sat at the edge of consciousness as the Blackbird clawed beyond 90,000 feet, the air so thin that even breathing felt unnatural. Inside the cockpit, every muscle ached under the suit's relentless grip. The helmet pressed into his temples, and the oxygen mask left his jaw numb. Sweat pooled in the boots, but there was no way to wipe his brow or shift for comfort. Above the Armstrong line, a glove puncture or suit leak would be fatal in seconds. Then, without warning, one of the J58 engines failed. The cockpit filled with alarms and vibration in an emergency that left no margin for error. At this altitude, a single engine out meant asymmetric thrust and a sudden loss of control authority. The aircraft yawed and threatened to roll, the thin air offering little resistance. Collins fought the stick, his gloved hands working through the emergency sequence. Standard procedures called for a descent below 80,000 feet before attempting a restart, but there was no time to dwell. He stabilized the aircraft on one engine, holding altitude just long enough to regain control. The analog instruments lagged, unreliable in the low pressure, and the suit's bulk made even simple tasks exhausting. Landing a Blackbird on a single engine was never intended as routine. Collins guided the jet back to Beale Air Force Base, every mile a test of skill and nerve. The pressure suit left pressure sores and bruises, the medical team checking for signs of decompression sickness as soon as he climbed out. The aircraft had survived, and so had its pilot, but the ordeal revealed just how thin the margin was between heroics and catastrophe at the edge of the atmosphere. Soviet air defenses cast a long shadow over every SR-71 mission. The SA-2 guideline, the same missile that brought down the U-2 in 1960, could reach up to 80,000 feet, dangerous territory for anything slower or lower. But the Blackbird's true shield was altitude and speed. At Mach 3.2, climbing past 85,000 feet, the aircraft outpaced the missile's guidance and pushed beyond the effective reach of even the best interceptors. The MiG-25 Foxbat, designed as a direct answer to the SR-71, could scramble to 80,000 feet in a zoom climb, but only for a few minutes before stalling. Soviet radar could track the Blackbird, but their missiles and jets struggled to match its ascent. Each time the Blackbird climbed higher, the threat faded below, forcing adversaries to guess, not intercept. Pushing above 90,000 feet was not just a test of mettle, it was a calculated move to stay outside the kill zone. Intelligence gathered by the SR-71 was more than photographs. It was leverage in global power struggles. A single sortie could sweep up the positions of missile batteries, airfields, and hidden convoys across 100,000 square miles in an hour. In the Middle East, Blackbird film revealed armored divisions shifting on the Sinai and pinpointed missile sites that satellites had missed beneath cloud cover. Over North Vietnam, these images mapped the movements of surface-to-air missiles, shaping bombing routes and saving lives. In moments of crisis, presidents and generals waited for SR-71 film to hit the briefing table before making decisions that could mean war or peace. The risk was not just technical. A downed Blackbird could ignite a diplomatic firestorm. After the U-2 incident, every flight carried the shadow of international outrage. An American pilot captured, a summit derailed, alliances shaken. The SR-71's success was measured not only in secrets uncovered, but in disasters averted by staying one step ahead. Today, classified technology pushes new boundaries, but the risks and the gaps in what we know remain. As the pursuit of speed and altitude continues, the limits of human preparation are constantly tested. Some missions are still unrecorded, and the sky keeps challenging those willing to answer. Share your thoughts below.